大家好，这里是第5届国际公共艺术奖北美板块的现场论坛部分。我是来自上海大学上海美术学院的张宇杰，请允许我代表主办方首先介绍一下本次论坛的与会嘉宾。本次论坛的线上主席是杰克·贝克先生。Hi Jack。
你好。
杰克是 IPA 的副主席兼创始人，是美国非营利组织预测公共艺术的创始人，公共艺术评论杂志前出版商。第2位是我们的艺术家代表罗纳德 Rael。Hi Rael。Rael 既是一位艺术家，也是加利福尼亚大学伯克利分校的建筑系教授。他同时呢还创建了 Rael and Fratello 建筑师事务所的联合创始人啊。这个建筑师事务所呢位于奥克兰。第3位艺术家代表呢是 Virginia San Fratello。Hi Virginia。Virginia 既是一位艺术家，同时也是硅谷圣何塞州州立大学的设计系主任教授啊，同时也是 Rael and Fratello 的联合创始人。第4位是我们 IPA 的研究员，同时也是美国非营利组织预测公共艺术的项目总监 Jane Krava。Hi Jane。Hi。最后一位呢是我们的本次的特聘专家马克·范德斯切夫。Hi
Mark。Hello。
马克呢从事经济学、区域规划和公共艺术的交叉研究，先后在圣保罗市担任了17年的经济规划师，并在明尼阿波利斯市和圣保罗地区的大都会担任这个委员有12年的区域规划总监的经历，同时还曾担任美国规划协会区域和政府间规划部门的主席，负责艺术和文化区域的规划项目，具有非常丰富的经验。好，接下来呢，我们就有请各位开始就这个我们北美地区的优秀案例跷跷板墙展开讨论。我们接下来有请杰克带领大家开始讨论。Hi Jack, we hand for you and you can start your conversation now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yuji. And thanks to everyone at the Institute for Public Art and Shanghai University, Shandong University, City of Qingdao. I feel honored to be invited to help facilitate this panel for the North American region for the 5th International Public Art Award. And I want to welcome all my fellow panelists. Thank you for joining today. We'll do a quick round of introductions and give a little bit of our role in this process. I'll start out and then identify others to go next. So I was fortunate to be invited to Shanghai University 10 years ago as one of the founders of the Institute of Public Art and to help develop this award program. So it's a real honor to be here on this 5th anniversary program. I'm the former executive director of Forecast Public Art and publisher of Public Art Review magazine. I retired a year ago, but remain involved in the Institute for Public Art. And I'm very proud to be playing a role in this process. I'll turn it over to Jen Krava to go next.
Thanks, Jack. Hi, my name is Jen Krava. I am the Director of Programming at Forecast Public Art, which is a public art nonprofit organization in St. Paul, Minnesota. I have been a researcher for IAPA for the past 2 rounds of the award and was honored to be able to research the teeter-totter wall and interview Virginia and Ronald in this project.
Thanks. How about you, Mark? Would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, thank you, Jack. My name is Mark VanderSchaaf. I am a retired city and regional planner from here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. I've known Jack since my early days as a city planner, and I've had a long time interest in bringing the perspective of creative placemaking into city planning and development projects. I was fortunate to finish my career as the regional planning director for our metropolitan area, the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And so I was asked to be an advisor to the jury for the International Award for Public Art, bringing my perspective as a city and regional planner into the process.
And Ronald, Rael, Virginia, would you like to say a few words first, please?
Sure, thank you, Jack. I'm Virginia Fratello, partner with Ronald Rael in the creative practice Rael Fratello, located in Oakland, California. And I'm also a professor and chair of the Department of Design at San Jose State University in Silicon Valley.
And Ronald.
Thank you, Jack. My name is Ronald Rael, and I, in addition to everything that Virginia described, I'm also the Eva Lee Memorial Chair at the University of California, Berkeley, in the Department of Architecture.
Great. Well, I want to congratulate the both of you for the recognition in the North American region as a finalist for this program and for the Teeter-Totter Wall project, which is awesome. So I want to congratulate Ronald Rael and Virginia Sanfratello of Rael Sanfratello, the creative practice that you have, plus Omar Rios of Colectivo Chopeque for being selected. And I know they were Omar was and his group was an important collaborative partner in this project. I also want to offer special thanks to Cameron Cartier, who was the juror for this region and helped select this project. She was unable to just panel today, but she did an amazing job as a juror, and I want to thank her in this forum. So we'd like to start out by giving the audience a little bit of an overview of the Teeter-Totter Wall project.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you. We're very honored to be here and accept this award on behalf of Rael Sanfratello and Colectivo Chopeque. We want to give a little bit of background about the origins of this event that took place along the US-Mexico border in the outskirts of Juarez, Mexico, in a community called Anapra, Mexico, and Sunland Park, New Mexico, which is also known as Anapra, New Mexico. The wall is a recent construction that replaced a barrier that existed there, and this was replaced in the last 3 years, and it's a enormous wall made of steel. And this is an event that took place that both Virginia, myself, and Omar Rios of Colectivo Chopeque organized with the community that exists in Anapra, Mexico. And we've been working with that community since about 2008. And we approached that community with the idea that we would have an event using teeter-totters, and they were all very excited, especially the children. And this was an event that was attended by mostly mothers and children and aunts. The ideas came from a book that was illustrated by myself and Virginia, authored by me, called Border Wall as Architecture, a Manifesto for the US-Mexico Boundary, which was released in 2018, that spoke about the crisis of and the biography of the construction of the wall along the US-Mexico border after the Secure Fence Act of 2006. These early illustrations were created in 2009. These are illustrations that speak to the notion that the border itself is a metaphorical fulcrum between US-Mexico relations. And it's an illustration that describes the inequities, the labor balances and trade balances. And we did many illustrations and architectural models describing many different stories along the border, but the teeter-totter wall was one of the illustrations of these stories.
There came a point in 2019 when we decided it would be really important for us to realize this wall, to speak to the inequities that Ron mentioned. Also at this time, the President of the United States was taking children away from their parents at the border, and we felt like it was really urgent to bring attention to this issue, to the people coming to the border, and also to the families that live at the border and have to experience kind of the horror of this infrastructure in their backyard. And you probably noticed in the earlier illustration, the teeter-totters were very long. This wall is 18 feet high and they were 20 feet long, which lifts someone up dangerously high. And we didn't want to put anyone in danger, but we wanted this experience to be thrilling. So we reduced the size of the teeter-totters to be around 14 feet long, which would allow someone to be lifted up into the air 4 feet. And we also designed them so that they could be inserted through the wall from one side, and the seat and the handlebars could be inserted in place from the other side. And we designed this so that it could be done very quickly, because we anticipated that the Border Patrol would arrive within 5 to 7 minutes. And we didn't know how long we would have for this event to occur. We worked with a studio in Juarez called Atelier Herrera to design and fabricate the teeter-totters. So you can see them here testing out the fulcrum that the teeter-totter sits on, and you can see the steel, making sure, of course, that they work and they'll function. And here we are kind of smuggling that fulcrum onto the border wall to make sure that it's going to fit. It fits in this 4-inch gap in between the vertical steel post. Again, it can be dropped into place really quickly. It slides over the steel angle at the bottom, and there's a key that tightens it into place, which you can see here. So we were able to very, very quickly insert the teeter-totters. The seat on the teeter-totter is actually made out of banana bicycle seats, and they have silver stripes and sparkles. And we thought it would be important to have a bit of levity and playfulness in what is simultaneously a fun and serious event.
Well, Virginia is mentioning the nature of this project, which is to bring people together through the joy of play. It is a very serious event, and the teeter-totters themselves are made out of the same material that the wall is made out of. And so we're demonstrating that that same material can be used to divide people, but it can also be used to bring people together. And working with the community in Juarez, we thought quite a bit about what the color of these teeter-totters would be. And we thought they should stand apart from the wall despite them being made of the same material. And we thought of many different colors, and certainly joy and play were on our mind, but we recognized that this was also a site of violence. And the color pink in Juarez has a very important meaning. And often when you see this color pink, it's used to describe the women, to remember the women who were killed during the femicides, during the times of violence, when Juarez was one of the most violent cities in Mexico. And so Virginia and I and Omar from Colectivo Chopeque spoke with the communities and asked if we can host this event. And one day we simply decided to take these teeter-totters and host an event with families and community members on both sides. And I'll just give you a brief video to show you how this happened. Immediately as we inserted the teeter-totters into the wall, the children were playing, families were gathering, people from both sides. Border Patrol did arrive, as well as the Mexican National Guard, and asked what we were doing. In both cases, we said that we were hosting an event with families. They stood back and they just watched, and even, I would say, enjoyed the event that was taking place. And I think there were a lot of lessons to be learned in this project. Lessons about what it means to have events in public space and what is, in fact, public space. The border wall is a taxpayer-funded project, and it is public space. And I believe that we can decide what to do with that public space. We can either see it as a barrier that divides us, or we can begin to think about if that wall is in fact necessary, and the importance of bringing families, communities, and cities together along the US-Mexico border and elsewhere as well. The documentation of this project was something that we absolutely thought about, that it would be important to document this event, but it was meant to be a small, humble event between communities along the border. we did invite a photographer, Chris Gauthier, who happened to be a documentarian from the Smithsonian. And later a photographer from the Associated Press joined as well. And while we did not expect the impact that this project had on the world, it was really just through a simple post on Instagram that ignited the visibility for this project. It was documented both by photographers and myself in this photo, flying a drone overhead to capture this photo. And I think what was amazing for us to discover is that a very humble event of unity along the border that lasted only 40 minutes, and no one ever told us to take this project down. It simply ended because the children were tired of playing on the teeter-totter like children in any park. And we simply took it down, but I think we made a lasting impression, and that for that short amount of time and through a couple of images, we're able to show the world, in fact, that the consequences that take place on one side have a definite impact on the other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mark, do you have a follow-up?
Sure. Thank you, Virginia and Ronald, for your overview, and especially the videos, which I've never seen before. That was really fascinating. And I wanted to just share what really impressed me the most about your project. You know, this is a case where there's childlike play occurring, but we all know that children can play in many different ways, sometimes very competitively. But I think what's really amazing about your project is that the teeter-totter experience is about the least competitive form of play there can be. There has to be a considerable amount of equality between the two participants in teeter-totter. The objective is for you both to enjoy the experience of going up and going down, and you can't do that if one side is trying to dominate the other. So here's this paradox of a wall which is premised on a situation of great inequality, in a sense being dissolved by this playful form that has almost total equality between the playful participants. So that's what I found really fascinating about the teeter-totter wall. I'm interested, though, as a city and regional planner, in your thoughts on the event contributed to building of community, both on the site itself or near the site, and perhaps as a model for what can contribute to community development elsewhere. So if you could speak to that, I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Thanks, Mark. I'll begin. I appreciate your thoughts about how the teeter-totter dissolves the wall. And of course, I think it's very clear that we stand in opposition to the wall. And I don't know if three designers can actually dismantle the wall, but I think what the project did is brought to attention the fact that we could at least begin to conceptually dissolve the wall, as you described, by bringing people together. And I think what's also important about that is that there's this moment of unification, and it's both real and generous, as you described, and that a teeter-totter is a very generous form of play that it really depends on one person giving the other person to have the opportunity to experience that joy. And if there are inequalities, perhaps one person weighs more than the other person really has to work harder to allow that other person to have joy. And it's that kind of generosity, the thing that was really experienced there that day. But I think there's the larger question about the walls that are constructed all around the world. And I don't think that this is a project that says we should construct teeter-totters around the world, but it should be to those questions of how do we connect, stitch back together, and mend communities who have been separated by walls and by other kinds of barriers that exist in the world. And that's a design problem. And I think it's a design problem that architects, designers, planners need to take on.
Yeah, thank you for that. I also was really impressed by this project. I'm a huge fan, first off, of temporary public art. In temporary public art, the artist gets to try out an idea, say research and development for something bigger or longer term, but the audience also gets to have an experience they wouldn't otherwise have to see how does that feel too for them. And a lot of temporary projects can lead to long-term or even permanent projects. And I just love the risk taking that went on here at this site, because this is a very charged site, even though, as you say, it's a public site. So I wanted to ask, what are some of the other ideas that you had as you were doing research and thinking about the wall? I'm sure teeter-totter wasn't necessarily the first idea that came, but maybe it was, and then you explored others. But I'm curious, with the context of the wall at that particular location, what were some other design thoughts and processes you went through?
Well, we've done a number of proposals for the book Border Wall as Architecture, and a number of them do have to do with or look at this notion of social infrastructure and how you can bring people together through social infrastructure. That might be parks. At the border, for example, you could have wildlife viewing areas. There is a lot of wildlife that crosses the region here. We made proposals for swings where you could swing from the United States, into Mexico and then back. So you would cross the border and be, quickly taken back into your own territory. We've made proposals for tables where people could dine together, or, you could sell food from one side through the border to consumers on the other side, and you could eat together. So we feel like social infrastructure is valuable because it brings people together, but it also adds value to place, right? Because then it becomes desirable. People want to have a nice park. People want to have nice places to eat. People want to have nice places to view wildlife. So it brings a kind of intrinsic value to that place through the infrastructure itself.
What's important about these proposals is that they aren't meant to be designs for the wall necessarily. What they're meant to do is highlight the issues of the horrors of that wall. So we don't advocate for the installation of a number of different projects along the wall. What we're advocating for is awareness of what has been divided, like wilderness, like people, like the ability to share and create community, and that these illustrations that we have produced speak to those issues and allow us to understand and highlight how severe that separation is. And that's extremely important. And we've, however, it teeter-totters, if I may, between telling the story of the wall and also highlighting those issues, and also thinking about what we do in a post-wall world. And so one of the projects that we're working on right now is to think about how those 650 miles of steel that are dividing the United States and Mexico might be repurposed in a post-wall world. So in other words, what else could we make with that steel? And so we're actively working right now on thinking about how we might transform materials that are used for the construction of division into materials that create spaces for unification. And in one project that we're working on, it's rethinking how that steel might create a house of unity, we've been calling it, but a place where people can actually come together. And we're working with shelters and the American Refugee Committee to think about how these ideas might take shape.
So imagine if you seesaw down that wall, like literally, and you use that material and that space and that place to make things that bring people together, that have social infrastructure. Imagine how much more valuable this place could be, right? How much more meaningful this place is.
Yeah, I love the idea of simply adding value to a space, which is a way of creating place. It's great the way you simplified it. Thank you.
Well, this leads into the question that I'd like to ask you. And thinking back to when we were talking as I was interviewing you to build the case study for the project, and looking at your sort of total body of work, you're thinking about the ways that architecture can communicate political ideas, right? You were also talking about, you both touched on this in the video presentation, and what you're just talking about with social architecture, consequences on the communities from both the border wall, but if you could talk a little bit more about that. But then also, what were the consequences of the teeter-totter event on those communities and the folks who participated.
You know, one thing that meant a lot to me that I didn't anticipate going into this was that most of the participants in the event that day were women and children. It was kind of fantastic to see the children from that neighborhood and their mothers on the Mexican side of the border. And then coincidentally, I think also more women and children on the US side had this incredible power, right, to kind of break down this billion-dollar government construct, right? This really hostile, divisive device, this wall. And usually women and children don't have that power, right? We just don't. And here was a moment where suddenly we had all the power. We made this wall go away, right? We made the Border Patrol stand back. We made the Mexican police stand back. And we created this really protected space, which was so precious and amazing and thrilling to see that happen in that community. And that's something that I took away from this as being one of the most, I think, meaningful outcomes of the event itself.
I think there were so many impacts that this project had on communities, not only there, but around the world. I think we had the opportunity to share with the world a very different narrative of what the US-Mexico border is. I think there has been so much news media describing the border lands as a place where no one lives, and also a place where bad men are doing bad things. Notoriously, when the leader of the previous regime said there were bad hombres at the border. And so I think we showed a different narrative that, in fact, this is a place where families live, where women and children live, and they too experience life in the way that everyone else does, and they can experience joy despite the oppression and horror of that wall that exists there. And so I think that narrative was very important to tell. Ripple effects were both for us and others. There's an organization that used the teeter-totter as the logo for their organization that reunites families by buying airfare tickets for families to come together to see each other. There are opportunities for us working, as I mentioned, with Alight, who's formerly known as the American Refugee Committee, to do, I think, more impactful on-the-ground work in migrant shelters along the US-Mexico border. And then there was just a ripple effect of how it became a symbol for unity all around the world and manifested through poetry and song and rap and illustrations and children's books. There was a recently children's illustrated book that has this and has appeared in films, motion pictures. And so, I mean, I think it's very surprising to us, the kind of impact that this very humble and simple event that took place along the border has had, but also very important for us to be able to tell a very important story of both the tragedy and the joy that is occurring in that space.
Thank you. Mark, I'm going to pass it back to you.
So I had a question, thinking about the theme for this year's IAPA forum, which is place remaking, and how this is manifest in the world I come from, city planning. Two ideas that we often talk about are context and place. And I know from studying your website that you have given some interesting thought to those ideas. And I wonder if you could share those with us now and suggest how that might contribute to the goal of place remaking.
Yeah, well, Mark, I think you're referring to something written on our website that we say, screw context, but embrace place. And what does that mean exactly? And I think for us, it means that when architects and planners and designers often speak about context, they speak about data. They speak about how they might gather that data. And there's something both sterile about data, and I think that data can often be very subjectively interpreted and can lead to problematics about what we do with that data and what the data makes us do. And I think for us, place means something very different. And it means going to these places and listening and experiencing and touching and smelling and enveloping ourselves in the senses of place, so we have a better understanding of what's going on in those places and not relying on external data that's gathered. And I don't want to discount the importance of gathering data, but I do want to stress the importance of understanding all of the complexity that exists within place that can't be extracted as a kind of series of numbers that describe something.
Thank you.
Emotions can provide context as well, can't they? And sensory input that you only get when you're there momentarily, which changes every time you go back to the site, right? So data is also limiting in that way. So that's a very good point to make. Of course, if you hadn't collected some data like the measurements you needed to put the teeter-totter through, it wouldn't have worked. And I think the ingenious part of this for me was that you knew exactly how to do this in a very short period of time, to be able to set up and operationalize the teeter-totter, which I thought was brilliant.
There's so many layers to this project, and you had been working on it for a very long time before it came to fruition. You touched on this a little bit, Virginia, when you were talking about the steel and the teeter-totter and something that would bring communities together. Could you both expand a little more on some of the surprising ripple effects you've seen from your work on this event, as well as what it's leading to for you in your practice?
Yes, we've had, as Ron mentioned, a number of surprising outcomes. You know, someone actually sent us a photograph of a teeter-totter that they built in a park in Carrara, Italy. So it's the pink teeter-totter. They built the wall and children play on it. It's part of the playground equipment that's a little bit normalized, which is strange, but also interesting, right? There are rap songs that have come out of this, poems, posters, as Ron mentioned. There's a movie, and maybe you can go into a little bit more detail, Ron, about the ending of the movie, because I believe you've seen it. Can I just pass it off to you for a second? You talk about that moment where the teeter-totter shows up in the
Sure, there's a movie called The Undocumented Lawyer. It's produced by HBO. And the poster shows a pink teeter-totter as part of the poster. And then the final scene in the film has families coming together along a teeter-totter. It's a spoiler alert to this. It's a beautiful film, but I had wondered if that film had anything to do with the teeter-totter event on the teeter-totter wall. And I reached out, and the director of the film said, "It did. It's amazing that you caught that." And they didn't realize who we were when we reached out to ask these questions. But I think it's really profound how the teeter-totter has become a symbol for unification, and perhaps it always was, as we mentioned, the kind of, you know, it's a weird thing to describe because it's not a toy. Like what is a teeter-totter exactly? Is it playground equipment? It seems such a sterile definition of what that is, and I like to think about it as a fulcrum, as described in an article by El País when they wrote about our project the day after that it happened. And they quote the mathematician Archimedes, who said, "Give me a lever long enough and a place on which to set it, and I can move the world." And I love to think about how they used that quote to describe this teeter-totter. It's so powerful, and we're so honored by that description and humbled by that description. But I think it's, in a way, a very apt description about how this tool, this device, can be used to both bring people together and have a consequence around the world for people to understand the importance of unity and togetherness.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, you know, the steel of the teeter-totter itself, of course, is dimensionally similar to the steel that's used to make the wall. And we have an opportunity now to actually use some of the steel that was intended to be used to build the wall. But of course, the current administration has stopped construction. So this steel is just sitting in steel yards close to the wall, but not there yet. So going forward, we have an opportunity to repurpose this steel. So to take the steel that would be used to make a border wall and use it to make housing, for example, or use it to make playground equipment, for example, or use it to make furniture, right, that brings people together. So we're continuing this logic, right, by repurposing this material, the exact material. So our government is going to pay to bring us together, hopefully, through some of these projects that are forthcoming.
Great. You also have an upcoming exhibition, is it, in Portugal?
We recently completed an exhibition at the Museum of Art, Architecture, and Technology in Lisbon. And that exhibition was a recreation of the teeter-totter wall. And it was something that gave us a lot of conflict in our studio. Like, should we actually do this? The museum wanted to replicate exactly that, the teeter-totter. So we finally agreed on a couple of conditions: that the wall would be replicated in its immensity so that visitors to the museum could understand the size and dimension of the wall, the amount of steel that's actually used, its oppressive nature. The wall was constructed long enough that it actually divided the museum in half. And there were 3 pink teeter-totters inserted through that wall. I showed an image briefly in the presentation, which I didn't describe, but it's a complete replication. But one of our conditions was that after the exhibition was over, which it just came down recently, we would have the opportunity to explore the reuse of that material as a form of R&D, as you described. So it's research and development to think about how that steel that was used to construct that wall might be used to make something else, like a house. So we both have the opportunity to use the actual steel that was intended for the construction of the wall to make designed objects of bringing people together. But we also have this other opportunity in the form of public art in a permanent installation in Portugal to imagine how materials of a wall might be used to be transformed to create a house. And so it will be very sculptural. Someone will actually live in it, but it's a kind of a full-scale study model that allows us to explore that possibility. And so for us, this is a very long-term project, as I mentioned. We're on this project to think about how we can move toward a post-wall world. That could be done through the disciplines of art and design.
Great, that's very exciting. Thank you. I just want to say I love the metaphor earlier that you mentioned, Ronald, of the fulcrum, and the lever and the leverage. And I think one of the most effective things public art can do is create a leverage. It can empower. And this was another thing you mentioned, Virginia, the empowerment of the women in the community at that moment. And public art and in its ideal form is a way of empowering and giving voice and leveraging. And it shows with a small effort, you can have a huge impact, So I think the leverage you're using is getting longer and longer as you talked about Archimedes and the leverage. I think about place remaking, and I think of R&D, and I think public art as an R&D for place remaking. And what you're doing with design and architecture is R&D for place development and place remaking, and it's powerful stuff. So thank you for that. As we try to bring closure to this panel, I want to ask about what are some kinds of calls for action we can inspire the audience for this panel to consider, rather than just hear our panel and then move on to the next one and then go home and go back to work and to our regular lives. What are some things we might inspire or challenge people to do out of this? I'm open to all of us contributing to this last part of our panel. But in thinking about action steps we might take, small, medium, large, I'd love to hear some thoughts about that and things you might challenge the audience that's listening right now to this to do.
Well, I would love to invite the audience to play today. So, in the teeter-totter, play was, of course, an act of resistance. And to use play as a device for, resisting division, resisting difference, for resisting racism, to reach out to someone today that is different from you, that you might not normally engage, and to reach out to them and to do something playful and to work to create kind of balance and joy and equity for you and that person as a first step for creating a bridge to a better world.
Maybe my call to action is somewhat similar, but I think we live in a world that's increasingly divisive, and that while this project engages a literal wall, I think there are other kinds of walls that we have built between each other. Walls that divide people of different political affiliations, walls that divide people of different gender identities or cultures or languages. And so my call to action is to think about any one of our audience members or ourselves have built any of those walls and see if we can come up with ways that maybe we can either dissolve them or create bridges across them.
I'll just share that, as we've been talking about, there's a lot of questioning that brought this project to life, right? And this event to happen, because you were questioning the infrastructure, you were questioning how people are relating to each other, you're questioning so many things about physical area that this event took place in and how it could happen. So I would just say to folks, ask more questions, right? And question your surroundings, ask people that you meet questions so that you can understand them better. Think more about what you don't know and ask questions to understand things in a different way.
So my call to action picks up on the distinction that has been made between context and place. I really agree with the way that you framed that up, Ronald and Virginia, that my experience as a city planner is that city planners at heart love places. We love the aesthetics, the emotions, the spirituality of place. But the language that we have to use so often is more quiet.
That you maybe share, maybe your front yard, maybe your window facing out onto the street. These are opportunities to have conversations and send messages and invite responses. So think of some temporary intervention you could come up with, even if it's just making something to put in a window to see out, to be seen out, and closure to this. But I want to thank you all for participating. It was wonderful.
And
Thank you all so much.
Virginia and Ronald, for your amazing work. And I'm very excited to see what comes next for you.
Yes, very excited for you. And thank you, Yuji, for helping organize. We're glad to be here and we wish you a great conference, rest of the conference. You're muted, Yuji.
Thank you very much for your contribution today. I really enjoy your dialogue today. I think our audience will enjoy it too. 非常非常感谢我们今天的嘉宾为我们带来精彩的讨论。谢谢大家。Okay.